Thanks for joining us on the Lake Doctor podcast. I'm Susie Light, and my co-host, Dr. Nate Bosch, is a professional lake nerd.
Yes, that's true. I received my doctorate from the University of Michigan in limnology, which is the study of freshwater lakes. In today's episode, we're really excited to have Jacob Macke. He's the owner of Chapman Lake Nursery.
And Jacob's going to tell us the difference between butterfly bush and butterfly weed. We are so excited about today's episode. The doctor is in. So, Jacob Macke, welcome to the Lake Doctor podcast. Former neighbor.
Yeah.
So why'd you leave our neighborhood?
Well, I left for bluer waters.
Oh,
Nice,
okay.
very nice.
We had an opportunity to move into our dream home on the lake, and so we moved to Chapman Lake. And so we left our neighborhood, our neighbors, which all were lovely people, including you.
Thank you.
And we found some new lovely neighbors up on Chapman Lake that we love hanging out with in the summer and winter.
How did you start your journey with being excited about native species?
I would say it has been a really interesting journey. I don't have a background in plants, biology, any of that. I'm an engineer by trade, and we moved to the lake, and within that first fall, started to have problems where the wind was blowing waves over our seawall. And we have a concrete seawall, brand new concrete seawall, just like anything you see around the lakes. And the water's just pouring over it, splashing over it. And the landscaping is washing away. Mulch is washing away. And I'm starting to see bare dirt, holes starting to fall through the dirt because it's eroding away. And I said, I have a problem here.
Yeah.
But I'd heard, I think, a few people talk about how native plants have deep roots, and that might be something that can help with erosion control. And I'd also heard a little bit from my kids' school. They went to Washington STEM, and they collect monarch caterpillars, monarch butterfly caterpillars. I was like, okay, I think those two are related. How do I do this? And so I started researching, where can I find these native plants? What are native plants? I actually had no idea. I hadn't even seen a monarch butterfly at that point, to my memory. I mean, maybe I'd seen butterflies growing up, but I couldn't tell you what they look like.
Mm-hmm.
So I find things like the Indiana Native Plant Society online, and then they've got a network, a map of where you can find native plant nurseries. And sure enough, one's got milkweed. And so we drive up to Jan up in South Bend and buy some milkweed and plant it in the new landscaping to help prevent our shoreline from eroding. And it was the most amazing thing. Within a week, my son was like, I just saw a monarch lay an egg on the plant. And I feel bad a little bit. I was that dismissive parent for a second because he was so young. And I was like, you didn't just see it. And I'm like, no way. He's like, no, I saw it. And sure enough, I didn't even know what I was looking for. I looked at the plant, didn't look like anything, but then, looked a few days later, and we had a caterpillar on our milkweed, and we had just planted it. And this was the summer of COVID, summer of 2020, and everybody's locked out of everything else. And so what we did that summer was learn all about monarch butterflies and native plants.
So we, as in your whole family, did this, right?
Yeah, and we're collecting monarch caterpillars and raising them and releasing them, and we're releasing over 50 butterflies that first summer, and it was just the magic that we all needed, you know?
That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and so in that, he was talking about native plants, right? So here, the science nerd in me, we got to get some definitions out there so we know what we're talking about. So oftentimes in landscaping, we would have non-native plants there, plants that we would get from a typical greenhouse that doesn't provide the native plants. You mentioned deeper roots in native plants, and so that's one of the good features we have in native plants. So our native plants are they're adapted here in this location, so they fit well in our climate and our soils, in the levels of moisture that we have. And so they're the plants that are supposed to be here, that have been here. Then we can have non-native plants, which is obviously the opposite of that. They're not from around here, often brought in by humans from some other part of the world, and they can be invasive, which is another term we've talked about on this podcast. Invasive means they're aggressive and they move in and they outcompete some of those good native plants.
And they might create a monoculture.
And they could create a monoculture. Yeah. So if we have these invasive plants, they're so good and so competitive that they start to crowd out all other plants. So they're the only plant in that area, which would then be a monoculture. And so what Jacob's talking about here with these native plants, these are the types of plants that we want to see around our lakes, that we want to see continue to have more of those in our area.
So Jacob, when you're planting native plants and you want to avoid a monoculture, are there plants that go well together?
Yeah, I think one thing that a lot of people don't realize with native plant gardens, and I didn't at first as well, is how well grasses really help. Grasses, sedges, rushes, things like that, in balancing native gardens. Because, like you're saying, Dr. Nate, all of these plants are really well adapted to this environment. You can plant them, and once they're established, you don't have to do anything. They're going to look fantastic, in the spring when it's really cold and wet, in the summer when it hasn't rained for 2 months. They all look beautiful, but they can spread and fill out an area. But if you have these grasses, they'll kind of balance out the area and keep some spacing between the flowers, and they'll also keep the flowers from, like the taller ones, from flopping over. Because you'll get, native plants like asters that are 3, 4, 5 feet tall, but if they're not supported by anything, they flop over.
And we've seen that here at the Lilly Center for Lakes and Streams around our facility here. We're in the Dr. Danae Miller Science Complex on Grace College's campus, and all of the plants around our building are all native plants. And so we've been kind of testing which ones are next to each other and do well, and have had to move some around over time. We've kind of learned as we've gone along.
I love that you both are engaged in research, and that you did research, typical engineer, right? Mm-hmm. You looked at a scientific process of how to plant plants that solved your problem. So how's your shoreline now?
It's great. The plants that we planted, the main one was Coreopsis, and the specific variety, Sand Coreopsis, it likes really rough soil, sandy soil, rocky soil, and it'll produce a lot of seeds. And those fall. We did some like boulder for a rock wall a little bit.
So glacial stone in front of your concrete
this is
seawall?
Actually
behind it. Okay.
Yeah, just to kind of shore up the land behind it, because
Yep.
It was like a slope. So we put that, but we've let the Coreopsis, it'll drop seeds in the cracks of those boulders, and it likes that almost better than the rich soil. And so we
Wow.
have Coreopsis growing out of like almost every crack of those boulder walls.
That's really cool.
And it just fills out in spring in like this beautiful yellow like display of little yellow flowers, and everybody drives their boat by and they're like, "Oh, we love your landscaping." So that's doing really well. And then we did actually do the Watershed Foundation's program of glacial stone in front of the seawall. So we mitigated it on both sides of the seawall.
Very cool.
So those native plants are important because they not only support insects and birds.
Mm-hmm.
What else do they do?
Yeah. So it's habitat, but it's also helping to filter water, right? And so Jacob has a great example there on his lakefront property, because it's filtering two ways. As those waves come and splash up on those boulders, as you were talking, and those Coreopsis plants are there, those waves, that lake water has nutrients in it. And so those plants are absorbing those nutrients as the water splashes up on them and as the water starts to percolate down into the even rocky soil where those plant roots are all down in there. And so the plants are taking that up, but they're also intercepting any nutrients that are coming from land headed towards the lake. And so they're sort of doing double duty in that way. And native plants are superior to non-native plants because they have such great root systems. And so Jacob could speak more to that from personal experience of growing these plants, but these root systems are amazing in absorbing nutrients and absorbing moisture as well.
Well, Jacob, you brought a couple examples of native plants. Do you want to tell us about what you brought?
Yeah, I brought, so right now in my greenhouse, we're just starting the plants. They're just appearing from seed, germinating. And so these are some of my earliest ones. And I brought a swamp rose mallow. So one of the things about native plants is you get to learn all these fun names of plants. And
Swamp
yeah, so
rose,
swamp rose
mallow
is a plant that you may not have heard the name, but you may have seen the flower. The flowers for these are some of the biggest flowers in the native plant community. And so, it might be a 6 inches across flower once that actually blooms in midsummer.
And typically they're pink or white, aren't they?
Yeah, they range from pink or white, I think, from what I've seen. And then there's similar flowers that are cultivated to different colors that I've seen around the area, but those aren't the native ones. The native ones are pink or white. So that's one I brought.
Is that how we get marshmallow?
There's another. Okay, that's a research thing. Some smart person's going to look at that and put comments in our.
Yeah, like
like the marshmallows you eat.
Yeah, marshmallows like s'mores and stuff.
I don't know.
Seems like we're talking swamps, marshes, mallows. I don't know. We'll have to look that up.
So I brought that one. It's a baby right now. It doesn't even have any true leaves on it. All it has are the cotyledons, which are the first leaves that come out of the seed.
Cotyledons.
Yes.
A new word for me.
Okay, so those of you who are just listening, you might want to switch over and watch on YouTube if you want to see what Jacob's talking about here.
Yeah, so if you look, this one only has 2 leaves that are coming out of it, and they're the first 2 leaves that came out of the seed. And they're almost all of the plants, these are dicots, they have 2 leaves, will look this same way. So whether they have super straight narrow leaves or really wide broad ones, the first ones look like this just round generic leaf shape.
Itty bitty.
Yeah, really tiny leaves. And they don't do a lot of photosynthesis is what I've read. And they kind of feed the plant as it's getting established. And then the second set of leaves would be the first true leaves that would resemble more like what the plant's actual leaves will look like. So
it would be hard as you're starting a lot of seeds out. You have to have them in certain parts of your greenhouse because just at the cotyledon stage, you would not be able to
no idea.
To tell one from another.
And I have had some issues with labeling.
Okay.
Where a sticker fell off and now I'm going, oh shoot.
So you got to wait till it gets a little later, and
I'm gonna have to wait
its
longer
lifespan to identify.
But for the most part, I do a pretty good job of labeling them and remembering which one's which.
Okay.
So a little cotyledon plantish thing that you've got in a pot. How big is that root?
These roots grow really quickly. When I go to replant them in the pots, then they're at least 3 inches long for something this size, if not longer. So 3 to 5 inches long.
Wow.
And we'll push them into the pots so that they've got room to fill this out for when you plant them. But
so the above ground part of this plant is barely visible above the soil surface. These 2 cotyledons surfaces are about the size of green peas, but yet you're saying that the roots are already
the root
3
is
inches
already
down.
to the bottom of this pot.
Wow.
And that pot is 2.5, 3 inches, maybe?
It's 2.5 inches across, so it's about, I think it's like 3.5 inches deep.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. So this one, swamp rose mallow, it'll be about 5 feet tall. It loves to be in those plantings you're talking about,
Mhm.
right along the water edge, really wet, or even, almost in the water plantings.
So would that be in a wetlands or along a lake or a creek?
Where I see it in our lake is along channels and creeks that are still getting a fair amount of sun. So not a super shady creek like you'd see with a lot of trees over it, but where there's a lot of sun and then there's some calmer water. I'll see this along the shoreline.
Yeah, so when we talk about wetlands, we've talked about them a number of times on this podcast series. We've talked about marshes are often sunlit wetlands, not like a swamp, which would be more of a wooded wetland. And so these would be more typical in a marsh type wetland.
But it's still called a swamp, rose mallow.
Yeah, which is interesting, right?
Yeah.
So, because in a swamp, typically you're going to have some trees in there. Sometimes it could be, you're still going to have areas of sun, but it's going to be interesting.
So it'll be in the sunnier area.
Yeah.
And then the other plant that you brought, I love the name of this, showy tick trefoil.
Mm-hmm. This is a new one for me, actually. I've been making lots of connections in the native plant world, and one is with people that sell seed, collect seed, and use it for restoration projects. And they got me some of this species, and it's a beautiful pink species that is more in like a prairie or a savanna. This would be away from a wetland. And this is another one, but it actually does have its second set of leaves on it. But again, it's still super tiny. It's not even the size of my fingertip. Like
those leaves are even
quarter to a
smaller
half
than the
inch,
first one.
even smaller. But it has its first set of true leaves on it, which are smaller than the cotyledons.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably got an even more extensive root system going.
And there is a picture on the little orange display case that shows what that looks like when it's in flower.
Yeah,
So-
I'm excited. I think it's going to be a beautiful one. This one looks like one that might take a few years before it flowers. Some take 2 to 3 years.
So typically, where would somebody find that if they were out walking in the trails? Would they find it there?
I think you would need either one of those preserved prairie savanna landscapes, like one of those few remnant places that exist, or a restored area.
So speaking of restored areas, tell us about your project, your property project.
Yeah, that's something that we're really excited about. So all of the interest in native plants led to more native plants, led to there's an opportunity here maybe to start doing this locally, where I'm not just providing plants for ourselves, but for other people in the community. And once I started doing that, I got so much excitement from everybody in the community, including people like Nate and you from the Lilly Center, that I'm like, okay, this is great. This really is turning into something, but we're going to need a home for it. So we started looking for a place that Chapman Lake Nursery could have a home, and found some agricultural land that was within budget. And it turned out that we were able to get 17 acres of farmland that we purchased last summer. And
so you're going to want to tune to the YouTube channel because Jacob brought pictures.
Mm-hmm.
this is the early mock-up that I made of where our land is, and then some ideas of what we might want it to look like. So when we first got it, I was really familiar with all these prairie plants, and I'd heard a little bit from actually this podcast. It was Nate Simon from Blue Heron Ministries on talking about savannas, and I'd done a little reading. I'm like, ooh, that sounds amazing. I'd love to plant oak trees and prairie plants and put them together. And our family's on board. They're excited really as well of let's do this. Let's actually do a restoration project and put this type of landscape where these plants are coming from on the property. And so people can come out and actually see it in person. You're never going to find showy tick trefoil in somebody's garden, but hopefully we'll have a place that you can see it in person.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was our initial idea. It was like, let's look at this as put a piece of prairie, because there are woodlands that you can go to in the area. There are beaches and gardens, but a prairie is a little harder to find. And so
Right.
that would be really awesome for people to see. So that was the idea. And we got it started on, okay, how do we do this restoration project?
So Jacob's work tucks in nicely with the Lake Dr. RX.
Yeah, actually, we've already been talking about, potentially some of this area that his family has as being a early demonstration area for Lake RX. So Lake RX, you'll remember, is where we're developing custom prescriptions for individual lakes in our region, where our research has shown what the major problems are on a particular lake and what the most strategic solutions are. And then putting those solutions, implementing those solutions then becomes the next phase. And so Lake RX is establishing and implementing then those prescriptions for those lakes. And so we know we're going to need to do things like constructing wetlands, restoring wetlands, changing some of our agricultural practices, planting native plants along shorelines. So a lot of the things that we're talking about here are examples of those solutions. And so Matt, our lead researcher, and I were able to go out to Jacob's property, the native garden property recently, and with others just start to dream a little bit. And so that from our standpoint, that was a lot of fun to be kind of at the beginning. I'd be curious to know from your standpoint, kind of how did that day go? And
I had a great time. It was really fun because it represented, so we had you out, we had Watershed Foundation out, we had Blue Heron Ministries is doing the restoration out, and then my brother is doing the civil engineering work on it. And it was a great example at the very beginning stages. It's a completely snow-covered, cold winter day. There's nothing on the land.
It was nice you had a campfire there to keep us a little warm.
But it represents we're going to have a space in the community and have the community involved and welcome there. And so that was really exciting. And for people, not just ourselves, to be excited about the project was really cool.
Yeah. And just dream, right?
Yep.
I mean, there was talking about, well, if we move some dirt over here and if we change the slope there and these kind of plants can go over here, and we got to make sure that we're, capturing any eroding sediment from here, and nutrients can get, sequestered or absorbed in this area with these plants, and it was really fun.
So initially you were thinking prairie.
That's correct.
And things kind of changed a bit.
Yeah, I'm background is mechanical engineering. I didn't know, I've heard wetlands and I've heard, restoring wetlands is good, but I was looking at a cornfield. And so I thought, okay, that'll probably be a good prairie, it's dirt, cover it with plants, sure. But what I didn't know, and people started telling me as I started looking to what resources are out there, and I'm talking to soil and water conservation and the NRCS and different groups, and they're like, well, you may have the soils you need for wetlands. Well, I don't know what soil types there are. Do you know what soil types, I forget the names of them, but
Houghton muck would be a common one that we'd have in our area, which is usually under a lot of our wetlands.
But they've surveyed the soil types, and that's in the records they have available. And they looked and they said, yeah, you have 4 or 5 acres worth of wetlands qualified soils, and so you might want to look at doing a wetlands restoration.
That's exciting.
It was very exciting because that brings a whole nother set of plants. It's not just these drier prairie species. Now you need all the wetland species and a lot of wildlife that you could bring in with that. And I think I'm equally excited about the potential of the wildlife coming in.
So it's 17 acres and you're going to be able to put a wetlands. Will you also be able to have prairie area in that 17 acres?
Yep. So you'll have the wetlands habitat, some low pooling areas where water can collect. but not necessarily stay there all year round. And then adjacent to that will be some prairie areas and savanna areas. There's some woods next to our property, so it'll kind of transition all the way from a marsh to a woodland all on one property. You'll be able to see.
And you've got a stream that comes through, more an ephemeral stream, not constantly flowing. But so on this, in this one area, 4 of the main 5 ecosystem types that we have in northern Indiana: prairie, wetland, stream, forest. The only thing that's missing is a lake, but there happens to be a lake pretty close by, just a little further down slope.
That's another great thing. It's really close to Chapman Lake, which means it actually flows into Chapman Lake. So all of the water that comes from that stream you're talking about, or any just runoff from the road that goes through the property, would eventually trickle into Chapman Lake, the lake we live in. And so the lake that we boat on, swim in, like that's going to all be impacted by what we do on this land.
Everywhere anybody lives in our county is on a watershed, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Oh, that's so exciting. I bet your kids are thrilled with this.
They're pretty excited too. Yeah.
So they were at Washington STEM. Are they in middle school now?
Yeah, I have one in middle school Edgewood, and the other one is she's at Lincoln in the gifted program.
Are they going to follow your engineering path?
I have no idea.
Or maybe a botany path.
That would be good.
That would be cool. Yeah.
You know, we know this really good school that's got a really good environmental program. Yeah, let's keep talking Grace College to those kiddos. So what more is it going to take to make your vision a reality?
That's a good question. And that's one that I'm learning as we go. I think the first thing is a plan. And so we're working on, that's where my brother comes in as a civil. He's doing a site plan, and that's going to cover creating all the elevations where we need to move soil, where we need to put soil to have the baseline topography that we need for this. And then on top of that comes the restoration plan that will come from the group we're working with, Blue Heron. And they're going to tell us, what do we need to plant? What do we need to treat for invasives? Is something I've already gotten plenty of homework from him on the invasives that we need to get rid of ahead of planting. And so then it'll be doing earthwork and adjusting kind of the layout of the land, and then planting, and then maintaining that over the years once it gets going.
So what kind of...
And we've also started brainstorming about education, right? Maybe there's some a trail that could go around the property with some signage teaching people about the different types of plants or the different ecosystem types there. We've talked about, even if we can figure out the logistics of it, doing some sampling where we see kind of how water gets cleaner as it moves through your property. And so there's lots of fun things to dream about and plan.
You went right down the path I was going to ask about.
Okay.
So as a homeowner and somebody who doesn't want to take on a huge, big project like you're doing, what lessons can I learn from what you're doing, and where can I go get more information?
Well, one thing I would interject right away is everybody's property has got some sort of slope to it where you've got water moving from point A to point B on your property. And so before that water leaves your property, can you make sure it's as clean as possible? And so these sort of planting ideas can happen right on someone's own property, with native plants often along a border area where the water is headed towards. Maybe it's along a street, maybe it's in the back corner of the property, but maybe it's up against the house where downspouts are coming down. We can do things called rain gardens, but these plants can intercept that water and so filter the water so it's cleaner as it's leaving the property. You were going to say something else too, Jacob.
Yeah, I think you have a couple parts of your question, and you did a good job explaining part of that. I think one of the things that I didn't really see before I got started on native plants is there weren't a lot of great examples of all of these things that you're talking about. And so that's part of what we want to do is, we'll have the big restoration area, but we also want to have some smaller garden areas that look more like something that you would have in a neighborhood at your home. So people could see, okay, I see these beautiful plants out in the restored area where there's all the wildlife, but I can also see the same plant in a small garden. Okay, maybe this is something that I could replicate in my home garden, and
So
it still looks beautiful.
talk about that lovely garden you planted at Kerr Park.
Yeah, so we did. That's another example. We did. I was reached out to by the Parks Department and
Warsaw Parks Department.
They said there's some interest with the art committee, which I think you were maybe involved with.
Maybe.
And they said when we put some of these art sculptures, we'd love to do a native garden around it. And I'm like, that would be another great opportunity. So we planted a native garden in Kerr Park along Market Street as a way to show, here's what these plants could look like. And we've got plants in there that'll bloom early and then throughout the middle of summer, and then some asters and things that'll bloom late in the summer. So it's always looking a little different throughout the year. But things like that, I think, really do help people visualize. It doesn't have to be on 17 acres. It can be, that one is 10 feet by 20 feet.
Is it that big? Yeah.
Yeah.
And the good thing specifically at that park is we were worried that kids would start climbing on those sculptures that are there.
Oh.
And by putting the garden around it, it helps create a barrier. So
that had not occurred to me at all.
Thank you for doing that.
I think what we planted works really well for it.
It does.
They're not tame plants; they're wild plants, and they grow up all the way around those, and so it does, I think, deter people a little bit in that way.
Yeah, I was just going to interject that because I think people think of native plants and they think, oh, that's not going to be as beautiful. It's going to be really hard to maintain. It's not going to look as manicured. So native plants definitely have some advantages. Now, you mentioned one thing which can detract for some people, which would be, by definition, they want to grow and expand, just like all plants do. A lot of our cultivated plants have been changed over time, so they don't have viable seeds, and so they stay in a smaller area, whereas these want to grow and expand, which moving out in a certain planted area can be actually really good and helpful, right? And in a environment along a lake shore, or where you're trying to filter water and sediments and nutrients, that's really helpful. But they can also take less maintenance in the sense of you don't have to add fertilizer, you don't have to water them, even when we're in drought conditions. So these plants that we have here around the science complex at Grace, we have never had to water these plants, even in some intense drought times, because they're used to living here and they can handle some dry spells in our local climate. So I think that's a really cool feature. And as you said, as a barriers, these plants, some of them can get pretty tall, they can get pretty thick, and so they can even be sort of good border areas. And I'm sure you think about that from the standpoint of when you're putting different plants together, which ones are blooming at which times, which ones are taller than other ones, which ones are more aggressive or less aggressive, and you can kind of put just the right ones together.
Yeah, you do have to balance your height and how much they're going to spread and grow. But all of them will, once they get established, they will kind of fill the area. And so I think the most effective thing that I've found is just making sure they have an area. So if you have a garden area that has a border to it and you mow around it, it makes it really easy. You're like, okay, that's their space. We're going to let them spread and move around and pop up in different locations and do their thing. But then by mowing around it, you kind of kept it to that one location, and it keeps it really neat.
So you inspired me, and I planted some native species in my side lot. And the first year I struggled. It felt like every critter was eating all that stuff.
Well, they love it.
Yeah. That's the other part of native plants, right?
Oh, they love it.
So the creatures in your neighborhood were starved for good
It's
Good
like
food.
you put out the most delicious salad for them. They absolutely love it. The bunnies, they come and get
Yes.
it, and they eat my milkweed, which is what I want for the monarchs. And the bunnies are like, "Thank you. I'll just chop that right to the ground."
We never had bunnies until I planted that stuff, and now we've got this big crop of bunnies. So, how do I help my native species grow? Do I just have to plant more of it?
There's some of that, and there's a few, I think, things that I've learned. So the ones that you figure out are really delicious, like my milkweeds that I really want, the bunnies will come and just chop those. So sometimes I'll protect those for, the first few months. You can either put a cage around them or a cylinder or something to let them get established. But then once they're established, they can handle a little bit of eating as well. But then there's just mixing them in with other plants, like the grasses I mentioned, or there's anything in the mint family they don't really like as much. So if you're mixing in those plants with some of the other plants they do really like, it'll provide some cover for them. So it's tricks like that that helps get the garden established. The other thing is that for a first year garden, like these little teeny tiny plants we have here, they're spending all their energy putting roots down. And so you're not going to see a lot your first year. The showy trefoil, I think like a lot of legume species will take a few years before it reaches maturity and will actually bloom and provide seed. So that first year, it may even only stay a few inches tall while it's establishing those deep roots that it'll need for those drought times.
Now, people who are a little less patient can choose to buy
That was me.
larger potted plants from your nursery or other nurseries, mm-hmm. right? Where it can already have a year or 2 or 3 of growth, and they can put it out there and have a little bit more of an established plant right from the beginning.
Still need a barrier because those rabbits love that stuff.
Yes.
That's what, we're working on that. I'm in my 3rd year of this, and so I start a lot of plants for that first year, and then I'll have some left over from last year that'll be 2nd year plants and really ready to go as well. So you can get some 2nd year plants from native plant nurseries, and those should flower right away and be a little bit easier to establish.
Now, one thing though I would think about, because I know this is the case with trees, you can buy trees. Our Soil and Water Conservation District will sell really small tree saplings, often bare root, or Arbor Day Foundation will send these to people. Or you can go to a nursery, a local nursery or hardware store, and maybe buy a potted tree that's already, 5 or 6 feet tall. And I've been told that over the course of maybe 5 to 10 years, that much smaller sapling will catch up and maybe even outperform the potted tree, just because they're just sort of growing aggressively, kind of starting right from very small, whereas the potted tree kind of
has been contained.
Is kind of contained. It was kind of in shock then when it got planted, a little bit more mature as a plant. Would you see similar things, or think there would be similar things maybe with these smaller native plants as well, that maybe some people might want to reconsider that idea I just threw out there of buying a potted plant that's already 3 years old and more firmly established? Maybe after year 6, you'd have the same thing as if you would have started with a really small one.
Just do it all. Get the big pot so you get, a little something to look at, and then plant the seeds.
Oh, kind of in the mix around it. Yeah, that makes your money go a little further.
Your question's a good question, and it's an interesting one to think on, of maybe an experiment we could run of, if I put a seed in the ground and let that grow naturally versus planting something that germinated in a pot until it was, something I could sell, plant that in the ground, versus something I kept in a pot over winter into a 2nd year. And by year 5, how do the 3 look?
Yeah.
I don't know that we'd see a lot of difference, because these plants grow and sometimes their lifespan might only be 3 to 5 years. But I like the question of like which one would do better. It is difficult to grow them in pots because they don't like it. They want to get their roots deep into the ground.
Oh, right.
And so that is a little bit of a struggle, is to keep them contained, to keep them in these, small containers with their roots not being able to reach all that.
So you mentioned something interesting. The lifespan of the plant might be 3 to 5 years, but they're reseeding, aren't they? So
What do you mean by reseeding?
they're reseeding. Yes, not like a receding hairline, like planting new seeds that they drop.
I never realized those.
Reseeding?
Both those words sound exactly the same.
Yep. Yeah, the ones that are shorter lived, like there is an annual that's really pretty, partridge pea, that it only lives for 1 year, and so it'll grow very quickly, flower, and then it's got some really cool seeds that explode. So it's got a seed pod that looks like a pea pod, but when it dries out, it opens up and twists open and shoots its seeds super far. And so we had one by our driveway last year, and we took a tape measure out to see like the furthest, because we could hear them from across the yard. Just hear this click, and then it's exploding open. And we measured up to 20 feet.
Wow!
That it had shot the seeds across the driveway.
Tell me the name of that plant again.
Partridge pea.
Partridge pea. Okay.
Who needs fireworks? We've got native plants, huh? 20 feet.
Yeah.
Wow.
Jacob, are there plants that you strongly desire to grow? Like, is there a holy grail of a native plant that you want to grow in your Chapman Lake Nursery?
Yeah. Part of the reason why I'm here is because of butterfly weed. And so that's the milkweed that I put on our logo, and it's a monarch host plant. But it's
beautiful orange blossoms.
Beautiful bright orange blossom, like super bright orange. You don't really see a lot of orange flowers. And this is native to Indiana. They're even trying to make it the state flower of Indiana, because our current state flower is not a native flower. But you got to get the soil conditions just right. It likes it really dry. It likes a little bit of rocky soils, and it likes to be amongst some grasses, like almost like a true prairie situation. I see it do really well along the roadsides where like the Department of Transportation has planted it.
Yeah.
But in my own garden, I've struggled sometimes. I've overwatered and killed them. The rabbits eat them. And so I was constantly buying butterfly weed. I'm like, okay, I need to just start growing this and finding the right conditions for it to thrive.
Now, I've also heard there's a plant called a butterfly bush. Is that a good plant?
Butterfly bush would be like giving your kids candy, but also candy made from another country, because it's not a native plant. I don't remember where its origin is. It can be invasive. It's not I don't think it's a super problematic invasive, but it is invasive. And it will attract a lot of butterflies, but from what I've read, it's not great nutrition for them. And so it brings them in, but it's not necessarily giving them the fuel they'll need.
Okay, I've got something to eradicate at my house.
And we even did the same thing. And so I had a year where I took pictures of all the butterflies in our butterfly bush, and now I'm completely in the deep end of native plants. And so we got rid of the butterfly bushes and we planted asters.
Okay, good. Well, I do have some of that butterfly weed in my garden. So I must have
You must have gotten it
crappy
right.
soil with a lot of rock in it.
It is this
with
area.
Some grass growing around it too.
We do have lots of very sandy soils, and I always thought Indiana was covered in like forests growing up. That was what I was told, but we actually did have the environments we're talking about, the prairies, the wetlands, the savannas. Yeah, I didn't know that, but they were present in this county, in this area.
Isn't it fun to learn this stuff?
It's fascinating.
Yeah. So I'm so thankful for the Lake Doctor podcast and the opportunity to learn about these native species. And tell us about your nursery, Jacob.
Yeah, so we're on our third year of growing plants and selling them here locally in the community. And what we do is we go to primarily like native plant events, or we go to a couple Earth Day events, and we'll have our plants for sale. So this spring, I'm going to Fort Wayne for an Earth Day event, or Lake Wawasee for an Earth Day event. And then we'll do some native plant sales in South Bend and at Lake Wawasee. And then we're going to do a sale here in Warsaw at the Barn 1880 over Memorial Day weekend.
Oh, good. I'll see you there.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I think there's a lot of excitement in this community for native plants. And so I'm hoping to see a lot of people there.
And do you have a website?
Yep. You can go to chapmanlakenursery.com and it's got our calendar and my contact information. And coming in April is when we'll post what plants we have available. Once we've got everything repotted like we've shown and it's ready to be planted, then we'll put those available for sale on our website.
And speaking of calendars, coming up in October, there'll be a workshop that you're going to be doing here at the Lilly Center as well, I think for like the third time.
This will be the third year.
Yeah, what's that workshop that you've been doing with us?
We do a seed collecting seminar where we show people in the community how to collect native seed. So I like collecting all of the seed that I grow here locally that I can from my garden, from gardens we planted with City of Warsaw, other places. And so showing people how they can do that to collect the seed they might want for their gardens is something we've done each year with the Lilly Center. And so we do that in October is usually when the seeds are ready. But I think you have a whole series of events, not just related to seed collecting, but also like native garden design,
right,
if people are interested in checking those out.
And where can people check that out, Nate?
lakes.grace.edu is our website, and we've got all of our events on there. Now, Susie, I've got a question for you.
Yes.
If you're trying to collect prairie seeds, native prairie seeds, where do you think you might collect those?
Well, I think where I think I might go, I probably legally can't go.
Where would you think you might go?
There is a prairie near the skating rink.
Oh, okay. Yes. So Acres Land Trust has owned that. I was saying just more in general, places to go often along railroads.
Oh, really?
And near cemeteries. Any idea why? Why would we have prairie remnant areas along there? Or, let's open it up to our guests too. Maybe Jacob has some ideas.
Well, I'm guessing because it was flat.
Well, partially. Any thoughts, Jacob?
So as I've been looking at what is native, I finally went and got a recommendation to look at Charles Deem was a botanist in Indiana in the early 1900s. He went all over the state cataloging what native species were present and their distribution throughout the state. And people like him wrote about going to the places you described because a lot of the open areas had already been converted into farmland. But the cemeteries or along railroads were places that weren't allowed to grow back into a forest.
Right.
Either because they're being maintained or because trains were throwing sparks and creating fires along the roadways, which have been like what Native Americans would have done to maintain some of the savanna and prairie landscapes. And so that's where they could find these species that you don't really see anymore because it's been turned into agriculture.
Really cool. Yeah, we've got some amazing heritage here in Indiana for sure.
That is an interesting tidbit of information.
Yeah, and when we were working on restoring some prairie habitat here on the Grace College campus, that's what we did. We worked with Nate Simons from Blue Heron Ministries, and we went out and collected seed for a few different years, and then we went and planted those into some of the we have 3 50-meter by 50-meter experimental plots on the campus of Grace College.
And people could tune into that podcast.
Yeah, where we talked
Blue
more
Heron.
about that with him. Yeah.
Controlled burns, right?
Yep.
So when I collect seeds from my butterfly weed, what do I need to do that?
You got to time it right. Is first, you'll see them make a seed pod in the summer to early fall, and then you want to wait until it cracks open, just a tiny amount, and that means they're ready. But if you wait too long, they're all attached to fluff, like little cotton floaty things, I don't know how to describe that better.
kind of like
floaty things.
like dandelions.
Yes.
would
Like
be
a
a good
dandelion.
example.
That's a scientific term.
Yeah. And once they open up, they're gonna disperse by the wind, and it just turns into a mess. So if you can get them right as they crack, then you can collect those seeds, store them in a dry spot until you're ready to cold stratify them. And that's another thing you'll need to learn how to do.
So I got to attend that workshop on October 3rd.
Mhm.
And it will be where?
Yeah, we're actually going to be right here in this room where we're recording this podcast in our learning lab at the Lilly Center.
All right. Jacob, thank you so much for being with us today. We really learned a lot about native species and the wonderful plants that you're growing at the Chapman Lake Nursery. And we're excited that you're going to be helping us with harvesting seeds. Thanks for being here today.
It was my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Lake Doctor podcast. You can share your thoughts or submit questions by leaving comment or sending an email to lakes@grace.edu.
Listening to this podcast is just the first step to making your lake cleaner and healthier. Visit lakes.grace.edu for more information about our applied research and discover some tangible ways you can make a difference on your lake.
We'll see you next time. The doctor is in.